Let's make one thing perfectly clear. Skateboarding is awesome. Everyone wishes they were good at it, and no one can resist the allure of a well-popped kickflip. The counterculture space it occupies is massive, and yet somehow has retained its authenticity throughout the years. Not only that, but there's consistently a new generation of skaters who push the creative and technical envelopes and keep the momentum of the industry moving in the right direction. When we look back at skateboarding as a whole, something which very easily could have been a passing fad, there are key moments and people that injected fresh life into that little wooden toy. To that end, there is nothing and no one more ubiquitous with skating than Tony Hawk. His influence and globalization of the craft cannot be understated, and is to skateboarding what Michael Jordan is to basketball. While his story is a fascinating and now familiar one, we're here to examine one specific byproduct of Hawkmania: the evolution of the skateboarding video game. The year is 1999. Every person under 18 is obsessed with extreme sports. Incidentally, the same demographic is becoming more and more enamored with video games. Nintendo 64s and PlayStations had become a staple in a vast number of homes across the world. While sports games were commonplace by this point, there was a gap in the market for something cooler, something that appealed to the in crowd. Alas, the Birdman cometh, and the combined efforts of Activision and Neversoft graced the world with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 in late August of 1999. Within no time, kids and teens across the globe who had previously never stepped foot on a board were kickflipping and collecting hidden tapes with a white-hot fervor. Suddenly, Superman and Jerry Was a Race Car Driver became the anthems of a new era in skateboarding, an era inspired by pixels rather than plywood. While Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 marked the beginning of what is now considered a skateboarding video game, it wasn't the first attempt at the digitization of half-pipes. The late 80s saw a slew of titles pushed out on the Atari and PC, perhaps most notably 720, released in 1986. All were rudimentary, chiefly due to the lack of technology to support any sort of real skateboarding experience. Once the 90s arrived, skating had begun to take on a culture of rebellion, freedom, and self-expression. Bright helmets and vert ramps were being replaced by baggy clothes, small wheels, and innovative street skating. Skating was cool in ways it never had been, and its influence was spreading across the nation. The end of the 90s saw a wave of skateboarding titles, with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and Thrasher's Skate and Destroy, surprisingly developed by Rockstar, emerging as the most notable. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater launched in August 1999 and was unlike anything that had come before it. Gameplay was centered around button combinations similar to fighting games, and time-based runs wherein players completed challenges. Thrasher was released a mere 2 months after Tony Hawk's Pro Skater and was geared towards slow, intricate, methodical gameplay. This approach has aged well, with many now considering it slightly ahead of its time, but hindsight is 20/20, and in the moment, Thrasher simply couldn't keep up. The learning curve was steep, the graphics were rough, and the game didn't feature any real-world pros. By comparison, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater seemingly had it all. Popular pro skaters, easy-to-understand controls, varied level design, and perhaps above all else, that glorious, glorious soundtrack, which I definitely can't include thanks to copyright laws. Activision and Neversoft had managed to make a highly competent video game that both celebrated and amplified the passionate counterculture of real-world skating. Finally, the scene had wormed its way into suburban homes by means of consoles, where it would continue to inspire skaters and gamers alike for years. With the success of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, it was a no-brainer that a series had been spawned. Not only did it spawn sequels, but imitators as well. ESPN and MTV would both publish their own titles in the early 2000s to general disdain from the public. Both featured rip-offs of the Tony Hawk formula with far less technical prowess. They were nearly unplayable in comparison. Tony Hawk was king and had no plans of passing the torch anytime soon. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 would launch to universal acclaim and was an instant classic, and contained vast improvements to the core gameplay. A plethora of new tricks were introduced, most important of which was the manual. Its addition allowed players to begin stringing together combos in new ways, increasing mobility. The number of challenges was greatly increased, with new variations on the typical high scores and collectibles. One important note is the advent of the Create a Park and Create a Skater modes, both of which have now become a necessity in the genre. After the triumph of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, Neversoft looked ahead to the release of the PS2, Xbox, GameCube generation of consoles, hoping to keep the momentum going. Consumers anxiously awaited what the technological advancements would mean for their beloved franchise. Fortunately, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 was adored by players and critics alike, and is still today one of the best reviewed games on Metacritic. The new possibilities afforded with the latest technology resulted in a game that was light years ahead of its predecessor. The fluidity and precision was jaw-dropping when compared to almost any game on the market, extreme sports or otherwise, and flaunted a degree of digital traversal not previously seen. The arsenal of tricks had grown once more, highlighted by the addition of reverts. Again, this changed how players would play the game, as combos could now be stretched out even farther. Maps were more intricately designed, with clear and deliberate lines guiding the player movements around the area. These major gameplay improvements were coupled with an expanded roster of pros and enhanced customization features, resulting in a truly great game. With the rampant success of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, Activision and Neversoft began to question how to enhance the experience even further. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 saw the removal of time-based runs, instead opting for a semi-open world. Players could freely skate to their heart's content within a given level and activate individual tasks at their leisure. It was a turning point in the genre, as players for the first time had a taste of virtual skateboarding freedom, and they were hungry for more. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 also featured the introduction of flat ground tricks, yet again giving players new ways to score points and hold combos. Movement and traversal were even more finely tuned, and the ease of traveling from one side of a map to another was immensely satisfying. Being able to cut across huge swaths of digital ground with remarkable ease and style would become one of the lasting legacies of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Even today, few games have been able to match prime THPS era maneuvering, with Sunset Overdrive being perhaps the best example in recent memory. By 2003, skating was becoming commercialized like never before. The MTV age, specifically the success of Jackass and the popularity of Bam Margera, had thrust skateboard culture into the limelight. Poised to capitalize on the popularity, Tony Hawk's Underground decided to attempt something previously unexplored in an extreme sports title, a full-fledged story mode. While this tweak to the formula was certainly not without its detractors, it gave the series a new angle. Kids playing could feel as if they had a chance to become a pro skater. It put the player in the shoes of a skater on the rise, providing a view into the world of skateboarding as a profession, albeit a highly dramatized one. While not breaking any new ground with its storytelling, it did provide the world with perhaps the most iconic Tony Hawk moment, hitting that sweet McTwist over a helicopter in Hawaii. Another milestone was the ability to get off your board and run, climb, and jump. It was a crude implementation at the best of times, but proved to be yet another standard of the genre. It also ushered in a new era of customization, with expanded gear, better player models, as well as custom trick and deck creation. Despite the successes of Tony Hawk's Underground, certain fans of the genre were becoming restless. The desire for more simulation-based gameplay was building amongst the real skaters of the world, but the powers that be had other plans in mind. 2004 would see the release of a sequel to Tony Hawk's Underground, which strayed away from any semblance of realistic scenarios, and instead leaned full force into the MTV side of things, for better or for worse. Tony Hawk's Underground 2 was still enjoyable, but its distance from actual skating began to ostracize the real-life skateboarder crowd. It featured things like graffiti tagging, riding a mechanical bull as Steve-O, and wild stunts straight out of Viva La Bam that seemed a far cry from previous entries. Sure, it was a fun video game, but the balance shifted entirely towards the arcade and away from the realistic. This only served to increase the divide between true skate culture and the fans of the game. As a result, the next iteration of the Tony Hawk series, called Tony Hawk's American Wasteland, took on a punk rock persona, focusing heavily on the origins of skating as a means to reconnect with the culture. While Tony Hawk's American Wasteland had good ideas, chiefly its introduction of one interconnected world without loading screens, it also couldn't help but lean into the arcade elements previously established in the series. Parkour was introduced, as well as surprisingly competent BMX gameplay, all of which placed it further into the realm of an all-purpose action sports game. American Wasteland was critically well received, but for fans it was clear that it was again time for a revitalization of the formula. It was also, coincidentally, time for a new console generation. there began to be rumors of something fresh and different on the horizon, something that would threaten to shake up the entire genre. Next time, we'll dive into the biggest shift in the industry to date and look at how a king was dethroned.